At my sister Madison's rehearsal dinner, she dragged me into a dim hallway, looked at my 7-year-old daughter, and told me to take her home because she was ruining the aesthetic for her wealthy new in-laws. What she did next was cruel, but what my mother demanded I do in front of everyone left the groom's family absolutely speechless. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family to protect your peace. My name is Kelsey. I am 33 years old and a single mother to my beautiful daughter Emma. For years I played the role of the quiet, dependable older sister, while Madison, who is 29, basked in the glow of being the golden child. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. We had just arrived at the rehearsal dinner for Madison's wedding. The venue was a breathtaking country club with vaulted ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a pristine golf course. It was an event designed to impress the family of her fiancé, Trey. Trey is a brilliant and highly successful African-American venture capitalist. His family is old money, educated, sophisticated, and deeply rooted in a legacy of excellence. They carry themselves with an effortless grace that money cannot buy. Madison, on the other hand, was desperate to prove she belonged in their world. She spent the entire engagement obsessing over optics, trying to mold our messy family into a picture-perfect dynasty we frankly were not. I held Emma by the hand as we walked into the grand foyer. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement. She had been talking about being Aunt Madison's flower girl for 6 months. For tonight, I had bought Emma a breathtaking custom-made silk dress. It was a soft blush pink with delicate hand-stitched lace along the hem. It cost a small fortune, but seeing the pure joy on my little girl's face when she spun around in the mirror made every penny worth it. She looked like an absolute princess. We had barely stepped foot on the hardwood floor of the reception area when Madison spotted us. She was wearing a sleek white designer cocktail dress holding a glass of champagne. The moment her eyes landed on Emma, her fake smile vanished. She practically sprinted across the room, grabbing my arm with a grip tight enough to leave a bruise. She did not say hello. She did not compliment her niece. Instead, she yanked me toward a dim, secluded hallway near the restrooms, away from the elegant mingling of Trey's family. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice trembling with a toxic mix of panic and rage. I looked at her, completely baffled. "We are here for the rehearsal dinner, Madison. Emma has to practice her walk down the aisle." Madison rolled her eyes and let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Are you kidding me, Kelsey? Emma is not the flower girl anymore. I changed it this morning." My heart stopped. I looked down at Emma, whose bright smile was slowly fading as she registered the harsh tone of her aunt's voice. "What do you mean you changed it?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. "I replaced her with Bella," Madison said casually, taking a sip of her champagne as if she were discussing the weather. "Bella is the 7-year-old daughter of Trey's boss. Having her in the wedding party is a huge networking opportunity for Trey. It makes us look good. Emma is just, well, you know." I did not know. "Say it," I challenged her, my blood turning to ice. Madison leaned in, her perfume suffocatingly sweet. "Trey's family is elite, Kelsey. They expect a certain aesthetic, a certain caliber of people. Having the child of a single mother who scrapes by planning cheap birthday parties walk down the aisle is not the look I am going for. Emma is baggage. You need to take her and leave before Trey's parents see you. You are ruining the aesthetic of my entire evening." I felt a physical ache in my chest, not for myself, but for my daughter. I looked down. Emma's bottom lip was quivering. Big, heavy tears welled up in her innocent eyes, and she grabbed my leg, hiding her beautiful custom dress behind my coat. She understood exactly what was happening. She was being discarded because she was not good enough. Any normal person would have screamed. Any normal person would have thrown that glass of champagne right into Madison's perfectly contoured face. But I am not a reactive person. I have spent a lifetime absorbing the cruelties of my family, building a fortress around my emotions. I knelt down right there in the dim hallway and wiped a tear from Emma's cheek. I kissed her forehead, telling her she was the most beautiful girl in the world. When I stood back up, I did not yell. I looked my sister dead in the eyes with an icy composure that actually made her step back. I was prepared to turn around and walk out the door to protect my daughter from these toxic people forever. But before I could take a single step, my phone buzzed in my purse, setting off a chain of events that would destroy Madison's perfect facade entirely. I guided Emma away from the bustling reception area and into the quiet sanctuary of the country club coat room. The heavy oak doors shut out the sounds of clinking crystal and polite laughter. Emma was trembling, holding the blush-pink fabric of her skirt in her tiny fists. I knelt down on the plush carpet, pulling a tissue from my clutch. I wiped her damp cheeks and smoothed her hair. "You did nothing wrong, my sweet girl," I told her, my voice steady and reassuring. "Aunt Madison is just confused. You are perfect, and this dress belongs to you." Emma sniffled, nodding slowly as I hugged her tight. That was when my phone vibrated in my hand. I glanced at the screen. The text was from my mother, Barbara. "Meet me on the porch. Right now." I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. At 62 years old, my mother had perfected the art of silent commanding authority. She viewed our family not as people, but as chess pieces meant to serve her ultimate goal of social climbing. Madison marrying Trey was her crowning achievement. I told Emma to sit quietly on the velvet bench and play a game on my phone for a few minutes. I stepped out the side door onto the wraparound stone porch. The chill of the evening air hit my bare shoulders, but the coldness radiating from my mother was much sharper. Barbara stood near the edge of the patio, bathed in the dim glow of a wrought iron lantern. She wore a tailored emerald gown, her posture rigid, her expression entirely devoid of maternal warmth. I did not bother with pleasantries. "What do you want, Mother?" I asked, keeping a safe distance. She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelets clinking softly. "Madison is in tears inside." She began, her tone accusatory. "You are deliberately making this difficult, Kelsey. Why did you bring the child here when Madison clearly told you she was no longer in the wedding party?" "I bought this custom dress for my daughter months ago," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "We were invited to the rehearsal. I am not hiding my child away like a dirty secret just because Madison wants to suck up to Trey's boss." My mother narrowed her eyes, stepping closer. "Do not use that tone with me," she snapped. "Trey's boss is a very important man. His daughter, Bella, needs to walk down that aisle tomorrow. It is crucial for Trey's career and, by extension, Madison's future." I stared at her. "Trey is a millionaire venture capitalist mother. He does not need a 7-year-old flower girl to secure his career. This is Madison being cruel and you enabling her." Barbara waved her hand, dismissing my logic completely. "That does not matter. What matters is that Bella is slightly taller than Emma. Madison called a private tailor who agreed to do an emergency overnight alteration. Bring Emma out here right now, take off the dress and hand it to me. I need to get it to the tailor before midnight." I actually laughed, a harsh, hollow sound that surprised even me. "You want me to strip my crying 7-year-old daughter out of her dress in a coat room so you can give it to a stranger's child? I paid for this dress." "The answer is absolutely not." Barbara's face hardened into a mask of pure malice. "You will do exactly as I say, Kelsey, or I will walk right back into that dining room and have a very loud conversation with Trey's mother. I know how much you care about what his family thinks of you." I stood my ground. "Go ahead. Tell them whatever you want. They already know Madison is neurotic." My mother smiled, a cold, reptilian smile. "Oh, I will not be talking about Madison. I will be talking about you. I will tell Trey's esteemed, highly educated parents all about your juvenile detention record. I will make sure everyone in that room knows you are a criminal who spent a year locked up in a youth facility. Let us see how Trey's mother, the Honorable Appellate Judge, reacts to having trash sitting at her dinner table. She will demand you be thrown out by security." The air between us grew impossibly heavy. She was using the darkest chapter of my life as a weapon against me. The record she was threatening to expose was real, but the crime was not mine. I felt the phantom weight of handcuffs on my wrists, a memory from 15 years ago that I had buried deep. I had taken the fall for a hit and run that Madison committed when she was underage and driving under the influence. My mother had begged me on her knees to take the blame, saying Madison had a bright future and I had nothing to lose. I sacrificed my own reputation to save my sister from prison. And now my own mother was weaponizing that ultimate sacrifice to steal a dress off my daughter's back. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, analyzing the sheer magnitude of her betrayal. She stood there triumphant, believing she had cornered me. She thought I was still the broken, obedient teenager who would throw myself under the bus to keep the family peace. She thought the shame of my past would paralyze me into handing over my daughter's dignity. She was completely wrong. The girl she manipulated all those years ago no longer existed. I had built a life of ironclad resilience, and I was done protecting them. I looked at my mother, and instead of cowering, I smiled. It was not a warm smile, but a sharp, calculated one that made Barbara falter for a split second. She had expected tears. She had expected a frantic apology or a total mental breakdown. She certainly did not expect me to calmly reach into my designer clutch and pull out my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen as I opened a secure cloud storage folder. "You think you are the only one who remembers the past?" "Mother," I asked softly, my voice barely rising above the rustle of the wind through the oak trees. "You think I spent the last 15 years building my life without taking out an insurance policy against this family?" I tapped a file labeled November 12th. The audio was crisp, digitally remastered, and perfectly preserved. I turned the volume all the way up, holding the speaker right between us. Out of the tiny speaker, my sister Madison's hysterical sobbing pierced the quiet night. "Oh my God, Kelsey, please, you have to help me." I hit something. I was drinking and I hit a parked car and I drove away. If the police find out, I will lose my college scholarship. My life will be over. Please, Kelsey, you have to say you were driving. Mom said you should do it because you are not going to a real university anyway. Please, Kelsey, take the blame for me. I pressed pause. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Barbara's face drained of all color. The smug, triumphant mask she wore just moments ago shattered completely, revealing the terrified, aging woman underneath. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at my phone as if it were a live grenade ready to detonate and obliterate her entire social standing. "Where did you get that?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling with genuine fear. "I kept the voicemail, Mother. I saved it on a hard drive and backed it up to 3 different private servers. I knew a day would come when you or Madison would try to use my sacrifice as a weapon against me. And now, here we are." I took a step closer to her, invading her personal space, forcing her to look me in the eye. "Let me make this crystal clear. If you or Madison so much as look at Emma's dress, I will not just play this for Trey's mother. I will connect my phone to the country club Bluetooth system and broadcast Madison's hit-and-run confession over the main dining room speakers. I will let Trey and his entire family of esteemed lawyers and judges hear exactly what kind of criminal he is marrying tomorrow." Barbara swallowed hard, taking a stumbling step back until her shoulders hit the cold stone pillar of the porch. "You would not," she gasped, her hands shaking. "It would ruin everything. Trey would call off the wedding." "Try me," I whispered. "Push me one more time and watch what happens." She was paralyzed. The immense power she thought she held over me had vanished into thin air. I had effectively disarmed her, and she knew it. There was no negotiation and no further threats to be made. The psychological game she had played for decades was officially over. "Do not ever threaten me with the crimes your golden child committed," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mother." I turned my back on her and walked away, my heels clicking rhythmically on the stone patio. I did not look back. When I re-entered the coat room, Emma was exactly where I left her, swinging her little legs on the velvet bench. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and questioning. "Are we staying, Mommy?" she asked softly. "No, sweetheart," I said, offering her a genuine warm smile. "We are going home. The food here is terrible anyway. How about we go get some double chocolate ice cream instead?" Emma's face lit up immediately. She hopped off the bench, grabbing my hand tightly. We walked right past the double glass doors of the dining room, where Madison was busy laughing falsely and clinging to Trey's arm, acting like the perfect future wife. We walked past the valet, out into the crisp evening air, and got into my car. As I drove away from the country club, I felt a profound sense of liberation wash over me. The heavy chains of guilt and obligation had finally snapped. I had fired the first warning shot and the enemy was entirely defenseless. But I knew Madison. I knew her entitlement, her greed, and her total lack of self-awareness. She was not going to let this go gracefully. And tomorrow, on the morning of her $1 million wedding, she would make a fatal mistake that would cost her absolutely everything. Inside the grand dining room, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the cold reality of the porch. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over tables adorned with imported white orchids. Waiters in pristine uniforms glided seamlessly across the floor, pouring expensive vintage wines. At the head table sat Trey. At 34 years old, Trey was a man who commanded the room without ever having to raise his voice. He had built his venture capital firm from the ground up, relying on sharp instincts and an unwavering moral compass. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, looking every bit the sophisticated visionary he was. Now his sharp eyes were scanning the room. He saw me walk toward the coat room earlier with Emma and noticed we had not returned. He also noticed his future mother-in-law Barbara slipping back into the room a few moments ago, looking unusually pale and agitated. Trey turned to Madison, who had taken her seat beside him. She was holding her champagne flute a little too tightly, her knuckles white. "Where did Kelsey and Emma go?" Trey asked, genuinely concerned. "I thought Emma was supposed to practice her walk with the ring bearer before dessert." Madison let out a heavy, dramatic sigh and set her glass down. She immediately reached for Trey's hand, intertwining her fingers with his, playing the role of the exhausted peacemaker. "Oh, babe, do not even worry about it," she said, shaking her head with feigned sadness. Kelsey left. She threw a massive tantrum in the hallway and just stormed out. Trey frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together. "A tantrum," he repeated. "That does not sound like Kelsey at all. Is she okay? Was Emma crying?" Madison leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a painful family secret. "You know how she gets, Trey. She saw the floral arrangements and the menu and she just snapped. She started complaining about how much money we are spending on the wedding and how unfair it is that she has to struggle while I get this fairy tale. She said she could not stand to be here another minute and dragged Emma out. It is just pure jealousy." I tried to calm her down, but she was completely irrational. Trey processed this information quietly. His business was built on reading people and assessing risk. He had only interacted with me a dozen times, but he had always found me to be grounded, practical, and deeply devoted to my daughter. The image of me throwing a jealous fit over flower arrangements simply did not align with the woman he knew. He looked at Madison, studying the slight tremor in her hands and the defensive posture she had adopted. Sitting directly across from them was Trey's mother, Jacqueline. She was a highly respected appellate judge known for her piercing intellect and her ability to see through deception in a courtroom. She wore an elegant sapphire silk dress, her posture immaculate. She had been quietly sipping her sparkling water, but she caught every word of Madison's story. Jacqueline did not say a word. She did not raise an eyebrow or offer a judgmental sigh. Instead, she simply observed. She watched the way Madison avoided Trey's direct gaze and how Barbara was currently gulping down a glass of Merlot at the adjacent table, looking like she had just seen a ghost. Jacqueline possessed a masterclass level of emotional intelligence, and her silence spoke volumes. She mentally catalogued the inconsistencies, but kept her sophisticated composure. Trey gently pulled his hand away from Madison's grasp under the guise of reaching for his water glass. He felt a sudden, inexplicable unease. His entire family valued integrity above all else. They were people who believed that wealth was a tool to uplift others, not a weapon to be used for status. If what Madison said was true, it was disappointing, but if she was lying, it was something far worse. "Excuse me for just a moment," Trey said, offering Madison a polite but distant smile. "I need to check on something with the coordinator." He stood up and walked out into the quiet hallway. He pulled his phone from his inner jacket pocket. He did not want to pry, but his conscience would not allow him to simply ignore the situation. He opened my contact and typed a brief message. "Hey Kelsey, I noticed you and Emma left early. Madison said you were not feeling well. Just wanted to make sure you two got home safely and that everything is okay. Let me know if you need anything." He hit send, sliding the phone back into his pocket. It was a simple, polite text, but it was the exact lifeline needed to unravel the entire web of lies tonight. I saw Trey's message glow on my screen as I tucked Emma into her own bed, safely away from the country club drama. I chose not to reply right then. Some truths require the harsh light of day to be fully understood. The sun rose the next morning, bringing with it the dawn of Madison's wedding. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside my window, a stark contrast to the storm brewing across town. I poured a cup of black coffee, enjoying the quiet peace. My phone sat face down on the marble counter. At exactly 8 in the morning, it vibrated. I flipped it over and saw Trey's name flashing on the caller ID. I took a slow sip of coffee, bracing myself. I swiped right and answered, keeping my voice light and professional. "Good morning, Trey," I said. "Kelsey?" He replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I am sorry to call you so early on the morning of the wedding, but I did not know what else to do. Madison has been awake all night, crying hysterically." I kept my tone perfectly neutral. "Is that so? What exactly is she crying about today, Trey?" He let out a frustrated sigh. "She told me that you cornered her last night and threatened to ruin the wedding. She claims you said you were going to use your industry connections to cancel the food delivery out of spite. She has been having a complete meltdown, saying you are trying to destroy our day. Kelsey, I know you were upset about Emma being removed from the wedding party, and I understand why. I was not happy about how Madison handled that either, but threatening the catering feels extreme. I just want your side of the story." I listened to his words, painting a vivid picture of Madison playing the victim. She was preemptively framing me for the disaster she knew was coming. It was a classic manipulation tactic. If the wedding fell apart, she wanted Trey to believe it was my fault, not hers. A weaker woman would have defended herself, frantically launching into a tirade. But I knew better. Over-explaining only makes you look guilty to a man who relies on facts. I set my coffee mug down. "Trey, I appreciate you calling me directly instead of taking her word as absolute truth." I began, my voice calm and steady. "I love my sister, but she has a very active imagination when she feels she is losing control of a narrative. I have not called any caterers, and I have absolutely no intention of ruining your wedding day. I respect you and your family far too much to ever orchestrate a scene like that." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the relief in his breathing. "Thank you, Kelsey," he said softly. "I really did not want to believe you would do something so vindictive." "I am not vindictive, Trey," I replied. "But since we are on the subject of the venue and the catering, I think there is something you need to handle yourself today." "What exactly do you mean by that?" he asked, the confusion returning to his voice. "I am not going to drag you into family gossip or point fingers," I said carefully, measuring every single word. "I will simply say this. As a venture capitalist, your entire career is based on due diligence and verifying financial integrity. I highly suggest you apply those same skills today. Before you put on your tuxedo, I strongly recommend you personally verify the venue payment receipts Madison gave you. Call the financial director of the estate directly. Do not ask Madison to do it." The silence that followed was heavy and sharp. I could practically hear the gears turning in his brilliant analytical mind. Trey was not a fool. He understood the implication of my words immediately. I was not attacking Madison emotionally. I was pointing him toward a verifiable financial discrepancy. "Are you telling me there is a problem with the venue deposit?" he asked, his tone shifting from an exhausted groom to a sharp businessman. "I am telling you to verify the receipts, Trey," I repeated softly. "I will see you at the venue later today. Take care of yourself." I ended the call before he could ask another question. I knew I had just planted a seed of doubt that Madison could never uproot. By giving Trey the agency to uncover the truth himself, I ensured he would see her lies with absolute clarity. I walked into my closet and pulled out a stunning emerald dress. It was time to head to the beautiful estate and watch the fake facade finally crumble to the ground. I drove through the massive wrought iron gates of the estate, my tires crunching over the immaculate gravel driveway. The property was sprawling, featuring a French chateau-style mansion surrounded by acres of manicured gardens and a private lake. It was the premier wedding destination in the state. What my family did not know was that I owned every single blade of grass on this property. Lux Group, my company, had purchased it 3 years ago. I parked my SUV near the service entrance, avoiding the Grand Valet line where guests would soon arrive. I grabbed the mandatory family gift, a crystal vase my mother insisted I present to Madison before the ceremony. It felt ridiculous participating in these hollow traditions, but I needed to maintain the illusion just a little longer. I walked through the opulent corridors, heading toward the master bridal suite. When I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors, the noise hit me like a physical wave. The suite was a chaotic blur of white silk, overflowing makeup bags, and discarded champagne bottles. 6 bridesmaids were lounging on velvet sofas wearing matching silk robes with their titles embroidered in gold thread. They were exactly the type of women Madison gravitated toward: wealthy, superficial, and deeply insecure. Madison was sitting at an ornate vanity, a stylist meticulously pinning her hair into an elaborate updo. She glanced at me through the mirror, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Well, look who decided to show up, one of the bridesmaids." A tall brunette named Harper drawled lazily from the couch. She was sipping a mimosa and looking me up and down. "I thought you would be too busy organizing some kid's pirate-themed birthday party today, Kelsey." A ripple of cruel laughter echoed through the room. They had all been fed the same narrative. Madison had painted me as the tragic older sister struggling to make ends meet as a low-level freelance party planner living in a tiny apartment. It was a lie designed to make Madison look more successful by comparison. I ignored the bait entirely. I walked over to a marble console table and set the crystal vase down. "I am just here to drop this off from Mother," I said, keeping my tone completely flat. Madison turned around in her chair, adjusting her silk robe. She looked exhausted, the skin under her eyes tight despite the heavy layer of expensive concealer. "Did Trey call you?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "He did," I replied honestly, crossing my arms. "He seemed very concerned about the catering." Madison's jaw tightened. "And what exactly did you tell him?" "I told him I have absolutely nothing to do with the catering, Madison. I told him he should verify all the vendor payments himself to put his mind at ease." Her face paled slightly, but she quickly masked it with a sneer. "You are so desperate to ruin my day," she hissed. "You are just bitter because you are a single mother who will never have a wedding like this. Look around, Kelsey. This suite alone costs more than you make in a year." I did look around. I looked at the 3 silver buckets filled with vintage Dom Perignon. I looked at the crystal bowls overflowing with imported beluga caviar resting on ice. I saw a rack of custom designer robes that Madison had purchased for her bridesmaids, all charged to the venue's master account. The sheer audacity of her spending was breathtaking, considering none of it was her money. "Wow!" Another bridesmaid chimed in, gesturing toward my simple, elegant dress. "Is that off the rack? You really should have let Madison buy you something. She has been so generous with us." I let out a soft laugh. "Oh, I am sure she has been very generous," I said, my eyes meeting Madison's in the mirror. "It is incredibly easy to be generous when you are spending someone else's money." Madison flinched, gripping the arms of her vanity chair. "Get out," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at the door. "I do not want your negative energy in here. You are not a bridesmaid. You are just a guest. Go wait in the lobby with the rest of the nobodies." I did not move immediately. I let the silence stretch, letting my calm presence contrast sharply with her frantic hostility. "You know, Madison," I said softly, turning toward the door, "for someone who is about to marry a millionaire, you seem incredibly stressed about finances today. I hope all your checks clear." I stepped out of the suite before she could respond, pulling the heavy mahogany doors shut behind me. The hallway was quiet, a sharp relief from the toxic echo chamber of the bridal suite. I took a deep breath, checking my watch. It was almost noon. The financial director of the estate was scheduled to run the final audit of the wedding account in less than an hour. The countdown had officially begun, and Madison's lavish house of cards was about to collapse spectacularly. I had barely taken 5 steps down the plush-carpeted hallway when a hand violently grabbed my elbow. I turned to see my mother, her face flushed and her eyes darting around frantically to ensure no guests were nearby. Without a single word, she yanked me backward, opening a heavy door to my right and shoving me inside. It was the master walk-in closet attached to the bridal suite. The space was larger than my first apartment, lined with custom cedar shelving and floor-to-ceiling mirrors. It was currently overflowing with Madison's excessive designer luggage and dozens of garment bags. Barbara slammed the door shut behind us and locked it. The sudden quiet of the closet was oppressive, heavy with the scent of expensive leather and my mother's overpowering floral perfume. She did not waste time on pleasantries. She reached into her tailored blazer and pulled out a folded piece of thick legal paper, shoving it aggressively against my chest. "Take a pen and sign this right now," she demanded, her voice a whisper. I stepped back, letting the paper flutter to the plush carpet between us. "What is that, Mother?" I asked, keeping my arms crossed defensively. "Pick it up and read it, Kelsey. It is a promissory note for $50,000. We need the money by this afternoon." I stared at her, completely bewildered by her sheer audacity. I slowly bent down and picked up the document, unfolding it. It was exactly what she said. A legally binding loan agreement listing me as the borrower. The terms were absolutely predatory. "You want me to take out a $50,000 loan on the morning of Madison's wedding?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "For what exactly?" Barbara paced the narrow stretch of carpet, wringing her hands. Madison went slightly over budget on the floral arrangements. She insisted on importing rare white orchids directly from Holland to match the centerpieces Trey's mother had at her own wedding. The vendor is demanding the final balance before they set up the reception hall. Slightly over budget, I repeated, scanning the ridiculous legal document. $50,000 is not slightly over budget, Mother. That is a down payment on a house. Why does she not ask Trey to cover it? He is a millionaire. Surely he can afford some imported flowers. My mother stopped pacing and glared at me as if I were the stupidest person on earth. "Are you out of your mind? Trey cannot find out about this. His family is incredibly strict about financial planning. They value modesty and fiscal responsibility. If he finds out Madison blew through her entire floral budget just to impress his mother, he will think she is financially reckless. It would humiliate her in front of his entire family." "So let me get this straight," I said, folding the paper slowly. "My sister wanted to look rich to impress her wealthy future in-laws. She spent money she did not have on flowers she did not need. And now, to protect her fabricated image, you want me to take on a massive, crippling debt." "It is not crippling," Barbara scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Stop being so dramatic, Kelsey. You are acting like we are asking you to sell an organ. You will just pay it off in installments. It is completely manageable." I looked at her, completely repulsed by how easily she expected to ruin my financial future. "I am a single mother," I reminded her, my tone hardening. "I have Emma to take care of. I have rent and groceries and school fees. How do you expect me to pay this back?" My mother let out a cruel, condescending laugh. "Oh, please, Kelsey. Let us be realistic here. You are a single mother with no real prospects. You live a completely unremarkable life organizing cheap little parties. You do not have a prestigious career or a wealthy husband. Madison is marrying into the absolute upper echelon of society today. Her success is the success of this entire family. When she is officially Trey's wife, she will take care of us. She will elevate all of us. But right now, she needs this favor." I stood there, letting her toxic words wash over me. She truly believed I was worthless. "You owe your sister this sacrifice, Kelsey," she continued, stepping closer and pointing a manicured finger at my face. "You ruined her rehearsal dinner last night by walking out and making a scene. You owe her an apology, and you owe her this money. Sign the paper. We will figure out the payments later. Right now we just need the vendor to stop threatening to pack up the flowers. I looked down at the promissory note in my hand, feeling the thick texture of the paper. This was not just a request for money. It was a demand for my total subjugation. She expected me to literally bankrupt myself to buy flowers for a sister who had just kicked my daughter out of her wedding party. The delusion was staggering. I looked back up at my mother, studying the desperate, frantic gleam in her eyes. She thought she had me trapped in this closet. She thought her guilt trip would break my spirit. But she had no idea who she was actually talking to. I maintained eye contact with her as I made my decision. I did not crumble under the weight of her psychological warfare. Instead, I carefully aligned the edges of the thick legal paper and folded it cleanly in half. I folded it again, running my thumb along the sharp crease. I unclasped my leather handbag. It was a rare, customized piece crafted by an independent designer in Milan that cost more than Madison's entire catering deposit. To my mother, however, it was just a plain black purse, completely devoid of the flashy luxury logos she worshipped. I slipped the promissory note inside the silk-lined interior and let the heavy gold clasp snap shut. The sharp metallic sound echoed in the quiet, airless closet, cutting through the heavy scent of her perfume. "I am not signing that, Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady octave. "I am not taking out a crippling loan to fund Madison's vanity project, and I'm certainly not paying a single cent toward these ridiculous imported orchids." Barbara stood paralyzed for a fraction of a second. She simply could not comprehend the word no. For 33 years, she had operated under the absolute delusion that she held total authority over my life. She expected me to bow my head, swallow my pride, and absorb the financial blow, just like I had absorbed every other toxic demand she had ever made. The realization that I was flatly rejecting her, that I was refusing to sacrifice my own daughter's security to save Madison from her reckless greed, triggered a primal explosive rage inside her. "How dare you!" she hissed, her face contorting into an ugly sneer. Her meticulously applied makeup could not hide the sheer vitriol radiating from her features. "You selfish, ungrateful little brat. I gave you everything." Without another second of warning, she lunged forward. Her hand slashed through the air, aiming a vicious open palm slap directly at my face. It was a move she had used frequently when I was a teenager, a physical strike designed to stun and humiliate me into immediate submission. She wanted to physically beat the defiance out of me right there among the racks of designer garment bags. But I was no longer a scared, defensive teenager. My reflexes were sharp-honed by years of navigating high-stakes corporate negotiations and dealing with ruthless, aggressive adversaries in the business world. Before her palm could even come close to connecting with my cheek, my left hand shot up. I caught her wrist mid-air. My grip was unyielding, locking her arm firmly in place. The sudden physical resistance shocked her completely. She gasped, her eyes widening in absolute disbelief as she tried to yank her arm back. I did not let go. I tightened my grip just enough to let her feel the undeniable shift in our power dynamic. "Do not ever raise your hand to me again," I said, staring directly into her panicked eyes. "Do not touch me, and do not ask me for another dime." I stepped forward, invading her space and forcing her to tilt her head back. "You are so blinded by your obsession with status that you cannot even see what is right in front of you. You have no idea whose house you are standing in, Mother." I released her wrist with a sharp downward motion. She stumbled backward, her shoulder hitting a rack of silk dresses. She stood there, clutching her arm, breathing heavily. But instead of absorbing the warning, she retreated instantly into her usual defense mechanism of blistering arrogance. She let out a breathless, mocking laugh, adjusting the lapels of her tailored blazer to regain her composure. "Whose house I am standing in?" she parroted, her tone dripping with venomous sarcasm. "Listen to yourself, Kelsey. You sound completely delusional. This is the Lux Group estate. It is owned by a massive private conglomerate. It is the most exclusive property in the entire state. Do not act like you have any real power here just because you managed to show up as a guest. You are a nobody standing in a closet you could never afford to rent, let alone own." She continued her tirade, completely oblivious to the immense, staggering irony of her words. "If Trey finds out the flowers are not paid for, it will be on your head." she spat, stepping aggressively toward the door. I will tell him you promised to handle the vendor, and backed out at the last minute out of pure jealousy. I will tell everyone that you ruined your own sister's wedding because you are bitter and broke. You think you can just walk away from us. We will see about that. She unlocked the heavy wooden door and pushed it open, storming back into the chaotic bridal suite without looking back. I stood alone, taking a slow, calming breath. She had completely missed the literal truth of my statement. She had no idea that I was the CEO of the private conglomerate she had just praised. She had no idea that I signed the paychecks for every single employee on this sprawling property, and she had no idea that her frantic threats were completely useless against the absolute avalanche of consequences I was about to unleash. I picked up my bag. The countdown was almost over. I walked out of the closet and made my way down the grand staircase to the main lobby. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed loudly, echoing through the cavernous space. It was exactly 3 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses and floor wax, but an underlying current of tension was rapidly building. I found a quiet spot near the massive stone fireplace, standing half-concealed behind a towering marble pillar. From here, I had a perfect view of the corridor leading to the bridal suite and the main reception hall. Usually at this point in a wedding timeline, the venue operates like a well-oiled machine. Waitstaff should be polishing silverware. Florists should be adjusting the final petals on the ceremony arch. But as I watched the grand double doors of the reception hall swing open, the scene was entirely different. Men in black polo shirts were carrying large crates of unarranged flowers back out to their delivery trucks. The catering staff, who had been bustling around the kitchen corridors just moments ago, were now standing in small groups, whispering and untying their aprons. The symphony of wedding preparation had ground to a sudden jarring halt. A woman clutching a silver clipboard sprinted past me. It was Madison's luxury wedding planner, her face flushed red and her usually perfect bun unraveling at the nape of her neck. She was muttering frantically to herself, completely ignoring the bewildered guests who were beginning to arrive in the lobby. She was breathing heavily as she frantically tapped her earpiece, pushing open the doors to the bridal suite without even knocking. I stepped out from behind the pillar and walked slowly down the corridor, following her path. I stopped just outside the open doorway of the suite, leaning casually against the doorframe to watch the inevitable explosion. Madison was standing in the center of the room, her hair half pinned up, holding a glass of champagne. "What is going on?" Madison demanded, her voice shrill. "Why are there men carrying my centerpieces back to the trucks? I saw them from the window." The wedding planner stopped in the middle of the room, looking absolutely terrified. "Madison, I do not know how to tell you this," the planner gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "The catering staff has completely stopped prepping the food. The florists are dismantling the ceremony arches on the lawn. They are packing everything up." Madison dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending pale liquid splattering across the pristine baseboards. "What are you talking about?" Madison shrieked, her face turning a blotchy shade of crimson. "Tell them to stop immediately. The wedding is in 3 hours. Get them back to work right now." "I cannot," the wedding planner stammered, backing away slightly from Madison's rage. "The order did not come from the vendors. It came directly from the top. The financial director of the venue just issued a hard freeze on all services for your event." The silence in the room was absolute. The giggling bridesmaids froze in place. Barbara, who was sitting near the vanity, dropped her makeup brush. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. In the luxury event industry, a hard freeze meant one thing. The money was gone. Madison's shock quickly morphed into explosive indignation. "A hard freeze," she repeated, her voice vibrating with hysterical anger. "That is impossible. I paid the deposit. This is a 5-star estate, not some cheap motel. They cannot just freeze my wedding." "I am so sorry, Madison, but the financial director was very clear," the planner said, her voice trembling. "He instructed all staff to cease operations immediately." Madison stormed across the room, stepping carelessly over the broken glass. "I want to speak to the manager now," she screamed, pointing at the door. Go get whoever is in charge. Do they know who I am marrying today? My fiancé is a multi-millionaire. His family is practically royalty in the financial sector. If they ruin my wedding, Trey will buy this entire estate and fire every single person who works here. He will sue them into bankruptcy. She was throwing Trey's wealth around like a weapon, completely oblivious that his money was exactly what she had stolen. She paced violently, threatening to destroy the venue's reputation, demanding the staff bow to her perceived status. She believed screaming loudly would magically fix the financial disaster she created. Her arrogance blinded her to the very real legal danger she was in. I stood silently in the doorway watching her desperate performance. She was loudly demanding to see the manager. She had no idea she was about to face the owner of the estate. Before Madison could scream for the manager again, the heavy suite doors swung completely open. Standing in the threshold was Mr. Montgomery. He was the venue financial director, a tall, imposing man in a sharp charcoal suit with a demeanor carved from solid ice. He did not look flustered by Madison's screaming. In fact, he looked utterly indifferent to her tantrum. He walked into the room holding a sleek leather folder, his polished shoes silent on the hardwood floor. I stepped further into the hallway, leaning against the wall where I could see everything but remain out of Madison's immediate line of sight. "Are you the manager?" Madison demanded, crossing her arms. She tried to project authority, but her voice cracked slightly. "You need to get your staff back to work right now. Do you have any idea who I am?" Mr. Montgomery stopped a few feet away from her. He opened his leather folder slowly. "I know exactly who you are, Madison," he said, his voice flat and authoritative. "And I am not here to negotiate catering. I am here to inform you that your event is officially suspended due to gross financial fraud." The air in the suite seemed to instantly evaporate. Barbara, who had been standing defensively behind Madison, suddenly gripped the back of the vanity chair. "Fraud." Madison echoed, her face losing every ounce of its color. "What are you talking about? I paid you. I gave you the cashier check personally 3 days ago." Mr. Montgomery pulled a piece of paper from the folder and held it up. "You gave us a piece of paper that closely resembled a cashier check," he corrected her. "However, when our accounting department attempted to clear the funds this morning, the bank completely rejected it. The check for $150,000 bounced. It is entirely fraudulent. The account it is drawn from does not even have a fraction of those funds." A collective gasp rippled through the bridesmaids. They began backing away from Madison as if her financial ruin was contagious. Barbara stepped forward, her hands shaking violently. "There must be a mistake," she pleaded, forcing a desperate artificial smile. "The bank must have made an error. Madison's fiancé is a very wealthy venture capitalist. He provided the funds himself. If Mr. Davis provided the funds, then you should have absolutely no problem executing an immediate wire transfer." Mr. Montgomery replied, completely unfazed by her name-dropping. "The policy of this estate is very clear. We require full payment cleared before any event begins. Right now, you have consumed thousands of dollars in room service, champagne, and labor hours without paying a single legitimate cent." Madison was shaking, her breathing shallow and rapid. She looked like she was about to faint. "I will call the bank," she stammered, reaching blindly for her phone on the vanity. "I will figure this out. Just tell the caterers to start cooking again. Please." "No one is cooking anything," Mr. Montgomery stated firmly, snapping the leather folder shut. "The freeze remains in effect. You have exactly 30 minutes to produce a confirmed wire transfer for the full amount of $150,000, plus a penalty fee for the fraudulent check. And if I cannot get it in 30 minutes?" Madison asked, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "Then I will not only cancel the wedding, but I will immediately call the local authorities." Mr. Montgomery said, his tone completely devoid of sympathy. "Providing a fraudulent cashier check for 6 figures is a serious crime. We will press charges for theft of services and fraud. You will be escorted off this property by the police." Barbara let out a choked sob. The reality of the situation was finally crashing down upon her. The lavish wedding she had bragged about to all her friends, the wealthy son-in-law she was relying on for her own social elevation, it was all evaporating right in front of her eyes. She looked at Madison, her golden child with a mixture of absolute panic and dawning horror. Madison dropped her phone. It hit the floor with a dull thud. She stared at the financial director, her perfect aesthetic completely destroyed. She had backed herself into a corner with absolutely no way out. She had stolen Trey money, blown it on luxury items, and tried to fake her way through the venue payment, hoping she could somehow manipulate him into paying twice after the wedding. Now her lies were exposed, and the threat of a prison sentence was hanging directly over her head. The clock was ticking, and she was completely out of options. She stood frozen, trapped in a luxurious nightmare of her very own making, waiting for the final blow. Mr. Montgomery did not wait for a response. He turned on his heel and walked out of the suite, his leather folder tucked neatly under his arm. The heavy doors shut, leaving a suffocating silence. The bridesmaids immediately began whispering among themselves, grabbing their designer purses, and edging toward the exit. Nobody wanted to be associated with a bridal party facing imminent police intervention. Madison let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She looked wildly, her eyes darting across the room until they landed squarely on me, standing quietly by the doorway. In an instant, the panic in her eyes morphed into a predatory desperation. She lunged forward, her heavy silk gown dragging across the floor. Barbara was right behind her, moving with a frantic, manic energy. "Kelsey, you have to fix this," Madison begged, her voice cracking as she grabbed my forearm. "You work in this industry, you do event planning. You must know the people who run this place. Call them, pull some strings, tell them you will handle the logistics or get them an industry discount. Just make them turn the kitchen back on." Barbara nodded vigorously, her fingers digging into my other arm. "Yes, Kelsey," she pleaded, her tone shifting instantly from the vicious tyrant in the closet to a desperate, weeping mother. "You know how these venues operate. They just want a guarantee. Call your contacts. Tell them you will personally vouch for the payment. Put it on your business account. You can write it off as a corporate expense. We will pay you back, I swear it. Just do not let them cancel your sister wedding." I looked down at their hands, clutching my arms like drowning women clinging to a life raft. The sheer unadulterated audacity of their request was almost entirely incomprehensible. Less than an hour ago, my mother had physically tried to strike me in a closet because I refused to buy her imported orchids. Last night, my sister had looked at my crying 7-year-old daughter and called her baggage. And now, facing the absolute destruction of their own fraudulent scheme, they expected me to magically produce $150,000 to save them. I gently but firmly peeled their hands off my arms, stepping back to put a physical distance between us. "I am not calling anyone," I said, my voice completely flat, "and I am certainly not vouching for a fraudulent cashier check." Madison's face twisted into an ugly mask of desperation. "Please, Kelsey," she whined, tears finally spilling over her expertly contoured cheeks. "I will do anything. If you just fix this money issue, I will let Emma back into the wedding party. I will tell Bella parents that there was a mix-up. Emma can wear her pink dress and walk right down the aisle in front of me. I will even make sure the photographer gets plenty of pictures of her." She offered it like a grand benevolent prize. She actually believed that allowing my daughter to walk down an aisle was a fair trade for committing financial fraud and bailing her out of a 6-figure felony. The disgust that washed over me was so profound it felt physical. "You think you are doing me a favor?" I asked, staring at her with cold, absolute contempt. "You think treating my daughter like a disposable prop is something you can use to barter with me? You discarded Emma because she did not fit your wealthy aesthetic, and now that your fake wealth has run out, you want to use her as a bargaining chip to save yourself from prison." Madison recoiled as if I had slapped her. Barbara stepped forward, her voice hardening, returning to her true abusive nature. "This is not the time for your self-righteous lectures, Kelsey. Your sister is in trouble. If Trey finds out about this, the wedding is over. You are going to walk down to that management office right now, and you are going to pay that balance. You are family and you will do this. Do." "I am not doing anything, Mother," I replied, my tone completely unwavering. "You two created this disaster. You lied. You stole. You wrote a fake check. Now you get to sit here and wait for the consequences to arrive." The finality in my voice pierced through their delusion. Madison realized I was not going to save her. I was not going to be her human shield anymore. The panic in her eyes completely hardened into a vicious, desperate malice. If she was going down, she was going to make sure someone else took the blame. She turned toward the vanity, wiping her tears with terrifying resolve, setting the stage for the biggest mistake of her life. The heavy wooden doors of the suite suddenly pushed open, breaking the tense silence that had settled over the room. Trey stood in the doorway looking incredibly sharp in his custom-tailored tuxedo, but his expression was dark and unsettled. Standing immediately behind him was his father, Richard. Richard was a formidable presence, a highly respected corporate attorney who had spent decades dismantling fraudulent executives in federal court. He possessed the same piercing analytical gaze as his son, but with the added weight of years of brutal legal experience. They had clearly heard the screaming echoing down the corridor. "What exactly is going on here?" Trey demanded, stepping into the room. His deep voice resonated through the suite, commanding immediate attention. I just walked past the main reception hall and saw a crew of men loading the floral arches back into a delivery truck. The catering manager told me there is a hard freeze on all our events. Why is the staff dismantling our wedding, Madison? The moment Trey spoke, Madison's entire demeanor shifted with terrifying speed. The vicious malice that had just been directed at me vanished completely. She let out a loud, ragged sob, covering her face with her hands as her shoulders shook violently. She practically threw herself across the room, burying her face into Trey's chest. He instinctively caught her, but his posture remained rigid, his eyes scanning the room for answers. "It is ruined, Trey," Madison wailed, her voice muffled against his tuxedo jacket. "The whole wedding is ruined, and it is all her fault." She pulled back just enough to point a trembling, manicured finger directly at me. Her eyes were red and brimming with freshly manufactured tears, playing the role of the helpless victim with chilling perfection. "She stole it." Madison sobbed louder, gripping Trey's lapels as if she might collapse. "She took our money, Trey." Trey looked down at Madison, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Stole what, Madison?" he asked, keeping his voice steady but laced with a growing edge of tension. "What money are you talking about?" "The venue deposit," Madison cried, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "The $150,000 you gave me to secure the estate buyout. I did not want to bother you with the logistics, so I asked Kelsey to handle the payment. She works in event planning, and she told me she could get us a massive industry discount if I gave her the cashier check directly. She promised she would deliver it to the venue financial director." Madison let out another dramatic gasp, wiping a tear from her cheek. "But the venue manager just came in here and said the check bounced. They said it was completely fraudulent. Kelsey kept the real money, Trey. She kept it because she is jealous of me and jealous of our life. She deliberately gave them a fake check to humiliate me and destroy our wedding." I stood there marveling at the sheer audacity of her fabrication. It was a bold, desperate lie spun on the spot to weaponize Trey's protective instincts against me. She was betting everything on the assumption that a groom would always blindly believe his crying bride over a sister she had spent months painting as a bitter, jealous failure. Barbara immediately stepped forward to corroborate the lie, her face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation. "It is true, Trey," my mother chimed in, shaking her head with an exaggerated look of profound disappointment. "I am so deeply ashamed of my oldest daughter. We trusted Kelsey. Madison just wanted to include her in the wedding planning to make her feel important. And this is how she repays us. She stole your money, and now the venue is threatening to call the police on us. You have to do something, Trey." Trey looked at Barbara and then turned his gaze slowly toward me. The silence in the room was absolute save for Madison, theatrical sniffling. Trey's eyes were searching mine, looking for the frantic guilt or defensive anger that usually accompanies a thief caught in the act. But he found nothing of the sort. I did not raise my voice to scream that they were lying. I simply stood my ground, returning his gaze with an unwavering calm that seemed to momentarily disorient him. Beside him, Richard adjusted his glasses. The seasoned corporate attorney did not look at Madison's tears. He looked at me, analyzing my complete lack of panic. He knew from decades of depositions that innocent people rarely scramble to match a hysterical lie. Kelsey Trey spoke, his voice low and tight, with restrained emotion. "Is this true? Did you take the payment?" Before I could even answer, the door behind Trey and Richard opened wider. Stepping through the threshold was a man who immediately shifted the entire energetic weight of the room. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, holding a thick leather briefcase. His expression was completely unreadable, possessing the kind of intimidating calm that only belongs to highly paid legal professionals. This was Attorney Pierce, my lead corporate counsel. I had texted him from the driveway earlier, instructing him to meet me at the suite with the physical documentation of Madison financial fraud. He walked straight past Trey and Richard, completely ignoring Madison, who was still clinging to Trey lapels and sobbing loudly. He stepped directly to my right side, presenting a united, impenetrable front. He unclasped his briefcase with a sharp, authoritative click that cut right through the sound of my sister's fake tears. He pulled out a heavy legal folder bound with thick red tabs and held it out toward Trey. "Mr. Davis," Attorney Pierce said, his voice resonant and commanding, "I represent Kelsey, and I can assure you that my client did not steal your money. In fact, she is the only reason the caterers did not call the local police on your fiancé 3 days ago when that fraudulent check initially bounced." Trey stared at the heavy folder, but it was his father, Richard, who reacted first. As a seasoned corporate litigator, Richard recognized the subtle markers of elite legal representation. He noted the premium stock paper, the meticulous tab organization, and the absolute unshakable confidence radiating from Attorney Pierce. Richard reached out and took the folder, his face hardening into an expression of pure professional scrutiny. Madison stopped crying instantly. The theatrical sobs died in her throat, replaced by a genuine, panicked silence. She looked at Attorney Pierce, and then at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, terrifying realization that she had completely lost control of the narrative. "Who is this?" Madison stammered, stepping away from Trey. She tried to sound indignant, but her voice was shaky and hollow. "Trey, do not listen to them. Kelsey probably hired some amateur actor to come in here and lie for her. She is trying to ruin everything. This is just another one of her pathetic, bitter stunts." Attorney Pierce did not even look at Madison. He kept his focus entirely on Trey and Richard, addressing them with the professional respect they deserved. "My name is Jonathan Pierce," he stated calmly. "I am the senior legal counsel for the corporate entity that holds the deed to this estate. I am here in my official capacity to deliver forensic accounting records regarding the venue buyout for this wedding. The documentation in your hands outlines exactly when the fraudulent cashier check was presented to our financial department and the subsequent banking alerts we received when it failed to clear the verification process." Trey looked deeply confused, his eyes darting between me and the lawyer. "Wait," he said, holding up a hand. "You are the senior legal counsel for the estate, but you just said you represent Kelsey. I do not understand what is happening here. Madison said Kelsey was just a freelance event planner trying to get an industry discount. Why would the venue legal team be representing my future sister-in-law?" Barbara, who had been standing silently in horror, finally found her voice. She stepped forward, trying to block Trey from looking at the documents. "Trey, please," she begged, her voice trembling with poorly concealed panic. "This is all a massive misunderstanding. Kelsey is just trying to cause drama because she is upset about her daughter. Do not read those papers. Let us just go down to the management office and write a new check right now. We can fix this quietly." Richard ignored Barbara completely. He flipped open the heavy cover of the legal folder, his eyes scanning the first page of the executive summary. The room grew so quiet you could hear the subtle rustle of the thick paper turning. Richard's face, which was usually warm and inviting, became a mask of cold, hard judgment. He was a man who had built his career defending ethical business practices, and reading these documents was like reading a confession of absolute moral bankruptcy. He looked up from the folder, his eyes locking onto Madison with a chilling intensity. "These are official bank rejection notices," he said, his voice echoing in the silent suite. "They are certified by the issuing financial institution. This is not a misunderstanding, Barbara. This is a deliberately forged financial instrument. Trey stepped closer to his father, looking over his shoulder at the highlighted banking records. The betrayal washing over his face was profound. He stared at Madison, the woman he was supposed to marry, in less than 3 hours, and saw only a complete stranger. The silence in the bridal suite became an almost physical weight pressing down on everyone present. Trey did not look away from Madison immediately. He held her gaze, watching the frantic, desperate calculations flickering behind her tear-stained eyes. Then he slowly turned his attention fully back to the heavy legal folder in his father's hands. Richard was not just skimming the pages, he was digesting them with the ruthless efficiency of a man who had spent his entire professional life destroying white-collar criminals. He adjusted his glasses, flipping to the second tab of the forensic report. Richard paused, his finger tracing a line of data. He looked up from the page and met Attorney Pierce's eyes. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Pierce," Richard said, his voice carrying a quiet but absolute authority. "You represented the primary stakeholders during the Horizon Tech merger last year. You do not handle small claims, and you certainly do not run errands for freelance party planners. The fact that you are standing in this room holding this specific documentation tells me everything I need to know about the severity of this situation." Attorney Pierce offered a single curt nod, acknowledging the professional respect. "I do not waste my time on frivolous matters, Richard. The evidence in your hands is comprehensive and indisputable." The air in the room grew even thinner. Barbara, who had been trying to formulate another excuse, suddenly seemed to shrink into herself. Beads of sweat formed along her hairline, ruining her expensive makeup. She looked at Attorney Pierce, taking in his custom suit, his unbothered posture, and the heavy leather briefcase resting at his side. The terrifying reality finally pierced through her delusion. I had not come here to argue with them. I had not come here to yell or cry or defend myself against their petty insults. I had come armed with actual devastating legal firepower. I had brought a corporate assassin to a family squabble, and she knew they were entirely outmatched. Trey leaned closer to his father, tracing the printed numbers on the bank statements. "Look at the timestamps, Dad," Trey said, his voice barely above a whisper, but echoing clearly in the silent room. "She presented this cashier check to the venue 3 days ago. The bank flagged it as fraudulent 48 hours ago." Trey looked back up at Madison, his expression hardening into something cold and unrecognizable. "You have known for 2 days that the check bounced," he stated flatly. "You knew the venue was going to freeze the event. And instead of coming to me, you waited until I walked into this room, and then you tried to blame your own sister for stealing it." Madison let out a ragged, desperate gasp. She saw the absolute disgust radiating from the man she was trying to manipulate. The polished, wealthy facade she had carefully constructed was burning to the ground. Driven by pure panic, she lunged forward. She reached out with both hands, trying to snatch the legal folder right out of Richard's grasp. "Give that to me!" she shrieked, her voice entirely stripped of its usual sweet cadence. "Those are private documents. You have no right to look at them." She did not even get close. Richard was a man who commanded boardrooms full of aggressive executives. He simply took a half step back and raised his left arm, blocking her advance with a rigid forearm. He did not touch her, but his posture was an impenetrable wall. "Do not ever reach for my hands, Madison," Richard warned, his tone dropping to a lethal, gravelly octave. "I am an officer of the court. Attempting to destroy evidence of financial fraud will only guarantee that you leave this estate in handcuffs. Step back immediately." Madison froze, her hands hovering in the air. She looked at Richard's cold, unforgiving glare and slowly backed away, stumbling slightly over the heavy hem of her silk wedding dress. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small and incredibly guilty. The remaining bridesmaids, who had been huddled near the vanity, quietly began slipping out the door, one by one, abandoning ship before the legal wreckage could take them down too. Richard smoothed the lapel of his jacket and turned the page to the final section of the report. "This is not just a bounce check, Trey," he said, handing the open folder to his son. "This is a meticulously documented trail of diversion. Look at the routing numbers. The money you transferred into her account did not go toward this venue." Trey took the folder, His jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked near his ear. He was a brilliant venture capitalist accustomed to analyzing complex financial portfolios. Reading a simple diverted funds report took him less than 10 seconds. He stared at the pages waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to snap into place. Trey traced the line indicating the rejected deposit and moved his finger down to the payee section, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. The holding company listed on the rejected check and the fraud alert was Lux Group Incorporated. He read the name aloud, his voice carrying a quiet confusion. Lux Group, he repeated, looking up from the heavy legal folder. I know this conglomerate. They own premium hospitality real estate across the eastern seaboard. But I still do not understand how this connects to Kelsey. Why is the senior legal counsel for a massive hospitality conglomerate standing in this bridal suite defending my future sister-in-law? Attorney Pierce took a calculated step forward, bridging the physical gap between the legal documents and the staggering reality of the situation. He buttoned his navy blue suit jacket, a deliberate movement that commanded the absolute attention of everyone left in the room. He cleared his throat, a sharp, authoritative sound that effectively silenced any remaining murmurs from the hallway. Richard stood silently beside his son, his sharp eyes darting between me and the lawyer, already piecing together the magnificent truth before it was even spoken aloud. It seems there has been a fundamental misrepresentation of facts regarding my client. Attorney Pierce began, his voice resonating with absolute clarity. Mr. Davis, allow me to formally reintroduce the woman standing before you. Kelsey is not a freelance party planner. She does not organize small neighborhood events, and she certainly does not rely on industry discounts to navigate the luxury market. Pierce paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room before dropping the final devastating truth. Kelsey is the founder and chief executive officer of Lux Group. She is the sole majority shareholder of the conglomerate that holds the deed to this entire estate. She owns the catering company that was scheduled to prepare your reception dinner. She owns the high-end floral boutique that sourced the imported orchids your fiancé demanded. This entire property, every building, every manicured garden, and every vendor contract falls under her direct corporate umbrella. The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. Trey physically staggered back a half step, his eyes widening in absolute disbelief. He looked at the printed legal documents in his hands, and then slowly raised his head to look at me. The sharp, brilliant venture capitalist had been completely blinded by a calculated family illusion. He realized in an instant that the woman his bride had mocked as a struggling single mother was actually the wealthiest person in the room, possessing a level of quiet power that demanded profound respect. Barbara let out a sound that resembled a dying gasp. Her knees buckled slightly, forcing her to grab the edge of the marble vanity to keep from collapsing. The daughter she had spent 33 years belittling, the woman she had relentlessly mocked as a failure with no real prospects, was standing right in front of her as a self-made corporate mogul. The sheer magnitude of her miscalculation was paralyzing. All those times she bragged about Madison elevating the family while treating me like dirt suddenly mirrored back at her. She had just tried to force a multimillionaire to take out a predatory loan to pay for her own flowers. Attorney Pierce was not finished. He turned his piercing gaze toward Madison, who was trembling so violently that the intricate beading on her wedding dress rattled audibly in the quiet suite. Madison did not just write a bad check to a faceless corporation. Pierce continued, his tone merciless and precise. She attempted to pass a forged financial document directly through her own sister business. She tried to defraud Kelsey Company while simultaneously demanding Kelsey use her non-existent low-level connections to fix the mess. It is a level of financial recklessness and personal betrayal that frankly borders on the pathological. I stepped forward, moving out from the shadow of the doorway and into the center of the room. I looked directly at Trey, offering him the professional respect he deserved. I kept my identity private because my business is my sanctuary. I told him, my voice steady and completely devoid of arrogance. My family has a long history of financial manipulation. I built Lux Group from the ground up without a single cent of their money, and I refuse to let them turn my life work into their personal piggy bank. I am deeply sorry that my sister brought this toxicity into your life, Trey. But I could not let her steal your money and use my own estate to facilitate her lies. Trey closed the legal folder with a loud, definitive snap. The sound echoed like a judge gavel signaling the absolute end of the trial. He handed the heavy binder back to Attorney Pierce, his hands perfectly steady now. He had all the information he needed. But the betrayal was not just about the forged legal document in the folder. It was about the ultimate destination of the stolen funds. Trey handed the heavy binder back to Attorney Pierce. His hands were perfectly steady now, but the muscle in his jaw continued to twitch, revealing the intense emotional storm raging beneath his polished exterior. He slowly turned away from the lawyers and looked at Madison. She was completely frozen in the center of the room. Her expensive white silk gown suddenly looked like a costume she had stolen rather than a dress she had earned. "Where did it go, Madison?" he asked. His voice was not raised, but it shook with a quiet, terrifying fury. "I transferred $150,000 into your personal account 4 weeks ago. If you did not give it to the venue, where exactly did my money go?" Madison opened her mouth, but only a pathetic wheezing sound escaped. She looked frantically toward her mother for help, but Barbara was staring blankly at the floor, completely paralyzed by her own complicity. "I can answer that for you, Trey," I said, stepping toward the large marble media console. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. As the owner of this estate, I have full administrative access to the network in this suite. I tapped a few buttons on my screen, bypassing the standard guest login. The massive 75-inch smart television mounted on the wall behind the vanity beeped and flared to life. I cast my screen directly to the display. A high-resolution spreadsheet illuminated the dimly lit room, casting a harsh blue glow over Madison's pale, terrified face. The document was a certified forensic audit compiled by my corporate accounting team, cross-referenced with the bank rejection notices. "Look at the screen, Trey," I instructed, my voice steady and professional. "On the 15th of last month, your wire transfer cleared into Madison's primary checking account. Exactly 12 hours later, she initiated 4 separate outbound transfers. She did not keep a single cent in the designated wedding fund." Trey stepped closer to the television, his eyes scanning the highlighted rows of financial data. The first transfer was for $68,000. It went directly to a platinum credit card company. Madison had secretly accumulated a massive mountain of high-interest debt over the past 3 years, trying to maintain the illusion of a wealthy lifestyle. She used your venue deposit to wipe her financial slate clean before she officially married you. But she did not stop there. I continued scrolling down the spreadsheet. The second transfer was for $35,000 paid to an exclusive luxury travel agency. That covered the 2-week all-expenses-paid bachelorette vacation she took with her bridesmaids to the Maldives. She claimed her friends pitched in to treat her, but she actually funded the entire trip using your stolen money. That is precisely why her friends just sprinted out of this room without a word. They knew they were complicit in spending fraudulent funds. Richard adjusted his glasses, looking at the remaining balance at the bottom of the screen. "And the rest of it?" he asked, his voice laced with absolute disgust. "Retail therapy." I answered, pointing to a series of transactions at high-end boutiques. "She spent the remaining $47,000 on a stash of limited-edition designer handbags and luxury shoes. In fact, Trey, if you walk into the master closet right now, you will find 3 brand-new orange designer boxes stacked on the top shelf. She bought them 2 days ago while she was supposedly crying over the venue contract logistics." Trey stared at the giant screen, the horrifying reality of the deception washing over him in brutal waves. He was a man who built his life on trust and calculated risk. He had completely trusted the woman standing behind him, and she had played him for an absolute fool. "Why would she do this?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "She knew the venue would demand payment today. She knew the fake check would bounce. What was her actual plan?" "Her plan was to manipulate you, Trey," I said, turning to face him fully. She was betting everything on your impeccable reputation and your family desire to avoid a public scandal. She knew that if the venue threatened to cancel the wedding at the very last minute, with all your elite guests waiting outside, you would pull out your own checkbook and pay the balance on the spot just to save the event. She planned to cry and play the victim, blaming a banking error or a corrupt venue manager. She was going to make you pay for this wedding twice. The utter ruthlessness of her scheme hung heavily in the air. Trey slowly turned his back on the television screen. The woman he had loved, the woman he had promised to protect, was nothing more than a financial predator wearing a white dress. Madison finally collapsed to her knees on the hardwood floor, unable to support the crushing weight of her exposed lies. Her quiet sobs were the only sound in the room, but I felt absolutely no pity for her. Stealing money was a massive betrayal, but the cruelty she inflicted upon my daughter was an entirely different kind of sin. Trey stood motionless, looking down at the woman he almost married, as if she were a venomous snake he had just found in his bed. Richard remained perfectly still by the door, his arms crossed, observing the total deconstruction of a sociopath. But I was not finished. Financial fraud proved she was a criminal. I needed Trey to understand exactly how hollow and malicious her heart truly was. I turned back to my phone and swiped to the next file in my secure folder. The massive 75-inch screen flickered, and the financial spreadsheet vanished, replaced by a high-resolution image of an email thread. "I want you to look at one more thing, Trey," I said, my voice echoing off the marble walls of the suite. "You were led to believe that Emma was removed from the wedding party because the mother of Bella practically demanded the spot. Madison told you she was pressured into making the change to secure your standing at the venture capital firm. She played the helpless victim forced into a difficult choice." That was another lie. I pointed to the glowing screen. "These are emails sent directly from the personal account of Madison to the wife of your boss. My corporate technology team flagged them when Madison foolishly used the unsecured guest network of our venue to orchestrate her social climbing. Look at the dates, Trey. Madison reached out to her first. She initiated the entire exchange." Trey slowly lifted his head, his eyes locking onto the enlarged text on the screen. The silence was deafening as he read the words his fiancée had typed just 2 weeks ago. But I did not want to leave any room for misinterpretation. I read the text aloud, ensuring my mother and sister heard every single syllable of their own cruelty. "Good morning," I read, keeping my tone deliberately clinical. "I know Trey values his position at the firm immensely, and we would be absolutely honored if your beautiful daughter Bella would serve as our flower girl. I currently have my niece slated for the role, but to be completely honest, she brings a lot of unnecessary baggage. Her mother is struggling financially, and frankly, they do not fit the aesthetic of the event. Having Bella walk down the aisle would elevate the entire ceremony. After all, your family are the only VIPs who matter to us." I stopped reading and let the screen shine brightly in the dim room. The word baggage hung in the air, a brutal indictment of her true character. His face hardened into a mask of pure, absolute disgust. His family built their entire legacy on lifting up their community, on valuing education, hard work, and the inherent dignity of every human being. He possessed a profound respect for family ties. Hearing the woman he loved refer to an innocent 7-year-old girl as baggage simply because she did not fit a manufactured wealthy aesthetic was a bridge too far. He looked down at Madison, who was now weeping openly, her face buried in her hands. She could not even look at him. She knew there was absolutely no excuse she could invent to justify those words. The emails laid bare her shallow transactional nature. "You used my career," Trey said, his voice dangerously low, stepping away from her, as if her proximity was physically revolting to him. "You used my professional relationships to bully a child. You actively insulted your own niece to suck up to my boss. You threw your own sister under the bus just to make yourself look more exclusive. The utter desperation of it, the sheer ugliness of your ambition is sickening." Madison shook her head wildly, reaching a trembling hand out toward his polished shoes. "Please, Trey," she choked out. "I just wanted everything to be perfect for you. I wanted your family to be proud of me. Do not ever use my family to justify your cruelty. Trey snapped, cutting her off instantly. My family would never condone this. We do not discard people for an aesthetic. We do not lie to our partners, and we certainly do not steal. You do not know the first thing about what makes a person valuable. The dismantling of Madison was complete. Every layer of her fake persona had been systematically stripped away, leaving nothing but the pathetic, greedy reality underneath. The financial fraud destroyed the wedding. The financial fraud completely destroyed the luxurious wedding. But reading those emails completely destroyed any lingering fraction of love Trey might have still harbored for her. He looked down at Madison, and his expression shifted from visceral anger to absolute hollow detachment. It was the look you give a complete stranger who has just tried to pickpocket you on the street. There was no warmth left in his eyes, no familiarity, and certainly no forgiveness. The man who had looked at her with such profound adoration at the rehearsal dinner just last night was gone. Madison felt the temperature in the room plummet. She knew she had crossed the point of no return, but her survival instinct was entirely rooted in manipulation. She let out a guttural, agonizing wail and threw her entire body forward. She dropped hard onto her knees, the heavy silk of her luxury wedding gown crumpling beneath her on the polished hardwood floor. She reached up with trembling hands and grabbed Trey by his wrists, her perfectly manicured fingers digging frantically into his pristine suit cuffs. "Please, Trey," she sobbed, her chest heaving as heavy tears ruined her immaculate bridal makeup. "Please, you have to understand why I did all of this. I was so scared. I was terrified that I was not good enough for you. Your family is so elite and so wealthy. You all grew up with absolutely everything, and I felt so incredibly small around your mother and your friends. I just wanted to be perfect for you. I bought those things to fit in so your family would not be embarrassed of me. I changed the flower girl because I thought it would help your career. I did it all out of love, Trey. I just wanted to be a wife you could be proud to show off to the world." She looked up at him, her face a mask of desperate, pathetic pleading. She was playing her final card, framing her toxic greed and pathological lying as a tragic sacrifice made in the name of love. She thought playing the insecure, overwhelmed outsider would magically trigger his protective instincts. Trey did not flinch. He did not soften. He looked down at her hands, gripping his wrists with a profound, unshakable disgust. Slowly and deliberately he reached down. He did not yank his arms away in anger. Instead, he calmly pried her fingers off his suit jacket, one by one. The physical rejection was incredibly methodical, conveying a chilling finality that screaming never could. He let her hands drop back to her sides, stepping back to ensure there was a clear, undeniable boundary between them. "You think my family would be embarrassed if you did not carry a luxury handbag?" Trey asked, his voice dropping to a chillingly quiet octave. "You think my mother, an appellate judge who spent 10 years as a public defender fighting for people who had nothing, cares about the brand of your shoes? You completely misunderstood everything about who we are." He stood tall, his presence dominating the room. "My grandfather picked cotton in Georgia." Trey said, his voice steady and sharp like shattered glass. "He worked 3 grueling jobs so my father could go to law school. My father worked 80-hour weeks so I could have the capital to start my own firm. We built our legacy on sweat, on education, and on an unbreakable foundation of personal integrity. We value character. We value honesty. We value how you treat people when they can do absolutely nothing for you." Madison sobbed harder, curling into herself on the floor, but Trey did not stop. His words were a surgical strike, dismantling her entire worldview. "You thought you could buy your way into our family with stolen money and designer bags," he continued. "You thought throwing your own niece in the trash to appease a corporate partner would make me proud of you. That does not make you elite, Madison. That makes you completely devoid of a soul. You are a hollow, superficial shell of a person, and you are the exact opposite of everything my family stands for." The speech was devastatingly cold and utterly absolute. There was no room for debate and no margin for a second chance. Trey had articulated the exact difference between true generational class and her pathetic, desperate illusion of wealth. He had exposed the rotting core of her character and held it up to the light for everyone in the room to witness. Barbara stood frozen in the corner, realizing that her daughter had not just lost a wealthy husband, but had been thoroughly condemned by a man of actual substance. The veil had completely fallen, and Madison was left kneeling in the wreckage of her own catastrophic vanity. Trey did not offer her another word of explanation. The time for discussion had definitively passed. He reached up to the lapel of his custom-tailored charcoal tuxedo. Pinned to the expensive wool was a rare white orchid boutonniere, a symbol of the lavish aesthetic Madison had desperately tried to steal. Trey gripped the delicate flower and pulled it free. The sharp pin tore slightly through the fabric, but he did not care. He dropped the orchid onto the hardwood floor right next to Madison's trembling hands. The crisp white petals bruised instantly against the polished wood, a physical representation of their completely dead wedding. Trey turned his back on his former fiancée entirely. He looked at his father Richard, who was already checking his platinum wristwatch with the cold efficiency of a corporate general. "Tell the guests it is over," Trey said, his voice steady and carrying absolute finality. "Tell the wedding planner to dismiss the string quartet and ask the valet to start pulling the cars around. There will be no ceremony today." Richard gave a single sharp nod. "I will handle the logistics immediately," he replied, his tone offering quiet paternal support. "I will inform the family and ensure our guests depart the estate with dignity." He cast one final withering look at my mother Barbara, before stepping out of the suite, leaving the heavy mahogany door cracked open. Trey stood in the center of the room, taking a deep breath as if clearing the toxic air from his lungs. He then turned his attention completely to me. The anger that had hardened his features just moments ago softened into an expression of profound, genuine regret. He stepped forward and extended his hand. "Kelsey," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you the deepest apology. I allowed you and your daughter to be disrespected in my presence, and I was too blinded by my own assumptions to see the truth. Emma is a beautiful, bright little girl, and she never deserved to be treated like an inconvenience. I am so incredibly sorry for the pain my blindness caused your family." I reached out and shook his hand firmly. "You did not cause this pain, Trey," I replied, keeping my voice gentle but resolute. "Madison and my mother have been operating this way long before you ever entered the picture. You were just their latest target. Do not carry the weight of their deception on your shoulders." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. He looked at the heavy legal folder still resting on the marble vanity, and then back at me. "You saved my life today, Kelsey," he said, the realization settling heavily over him. "If you had not stepped in, if you had let her manipulate me into paying that venue balance, I would have tied my legacy to a woman who views people as disposable commodities. You risked your own peace to protect me from making the absolute biggest mistake of my life. I will never forget what you did for me today." "You are a good man, Trey," I told him, offering a small, sincere smile. "You deserve a partner who respects you. Go be with your family." Trey let go of my hand. He adjusted his jacket, took one final look around the opulent bridal suite, and walked out the door without ever looking down at Madison again. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, moving further and further away until they disappeared completely into the grand foyer. The moment Trey was gone, the terrifying reality of her situation hit Madison with the force of a freight train. The silence of the room was violently shattered by a high-pitched, blood-curdling shriek. Madison threw her head back and screamed a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and absolute defeat. She slammed her fists against the hardwood floor, tearing at the expensive silk of her wedding dress. She thrashed on the ground like a spoiled child denied a toy, entirely oblivious to the pathetic spectacle she was creating. Barbara finally moved, rushing forward to drop to her knees beside her golden child. She tried to wrap her arms around Madison, trying to shush her frantic screams, but Madison violently shoved her mother away. "Do not touch me!" Madison shrieked, her face red and distorted. "You ruined this. You told me to use the money. You told me Trey would never find out. This is all your fault." The rapid turn of this blame game was spectacular to witness. In the span of a single hour, they had gone from a united front of toxic arrogance to viciously turning on each other like cornered animals. I stood near the doorway observing the chaotic scene with absolute detachment. Their empire of lies was crumbling perfectly today. Madison continued to wail on the floor, her hands clutching the shredded remains of her designer veil. Barbara stood over her for a few moments, looking down at the daughter she had worshipped for 29 years. But the look in my mother's eyes was not one of maternal concern. It was the look of a calculated investor realizing her primary asset had just plummeted to zero. The wealthy venture capitalist was gone. The guaranteed access to high society, the country club memberships, the luxury vacations, they had all vanished the second Trey walked out that door. Barbara's brain seemed to physically short-circuit as she processed the catastrophic loss of her social standing. She realized instantly that tying her future to Madison was now a massive financial liability. So my mother did what she had always done. She pivoted to the nearest source of absolute power. Barbara slowly turned away from the hysterical bride, completely turning her back on the child she had relentlessly favored her entire life. She stepped away from Madison, leaving her sobbing on the floor. She smoothed the wrinkles out of her tailored emerald blazer and took a deep, steadying breath. When she looked up and met my eyes, her face underwent a transformation that was genuinely terrifying to witness. The vicious, sneering tyrant who had cornered me in a closet less than an hour ago completely disappeared. In her place was a sickeningly sweet, doting mother. A wide artificial smile stretched across her face, reaching her eyes in a way that looked entirely unhinged. She stepped right over Madison's discarded white bouquet and walked directly toward me. "Kelsey, my brilliant, beautiful girl." Barbara cooed, her voice dripping with a syrupy, artificial affection I had never heard directed at me. She reached out with both hands, attempting to gently stroke my forearm. I instinctively took a sharp step back, refusing to let her physically touch me. She let her hands drop, but her manic smile did not falter. "I am just so incredibly proud of you," she continued, clasping her hands together against her chest. "I always knew you had it in you. I always knew you were destined for absolute greatness. A chief executive officer of a massive real estate conglomerate. My own daughter. It is just spectacular, Kelsey. You have built an absolute empire right under our noses." I stared at her, letting the sheer audacity of her words echo in the quiet space between us. "You always knew," I asked, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You told me I was a failure with no prospects just this morning, Mother. You called my career a joke. You physically tried to strike me because I refused to pay for imported orchids. You threatened to ruin me by bringing up a juvenile record that belonged to the sister you are currently stepping over." Barbara waved her hand dismissively, letting out a light, airy laugh. "Oh, Kelsey, darling, you know how tense weddings can be." She deflected, her tone painfully fake. "People say silly things when they are incredibly stressed. I was just trying to motivate you. I always pushed you hard because I knew you were capable of this exact level of success. Look at this beautiful estate. Look at what you own. You are the real success story of this family. We do not need Trey or his incredibly snobby parents. We never needed them anyway." She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. The mask of the loving mother slipped just enough to reveal the raw, predatory greed shining in her eyes. "Madison made a terrible mistake. But she is still your sister," she murmured, gesturing vaguely toward the sobbing woman on the floor. "And I am still your mother, Kelsey. We are blood. You have so much wealth now. You have more money than we could ever spend. You can take care of us. You can pay off this venue invoice today and handle Madison credit card debt so the police do not get involved. We can keep this all in the family quietly. You can even move us into one of your luxury properties. We do not need wealthy outsiders to elevate us anymore. You can take care of your mother and sister now, right?" She tilted her head, looking at me with wide, expectant eyes. She truly believed that appealing to my sense of familial duty would suddenly erase a lifetime of cruelty. She thought my financial success was simply a new bank account for her to drain. She smiled, waiting for me to eagerly accept the role of the family savior she had just assigned me. But she was about to learn my wealth had boundaries. I stepped back from her outstretched hands, feeling absolute physical repulsion wash over me. She stood there wearing that grotesque artificial smile, waiting for me to pull out my checkbook and save her from the consequences of her own actions. "No, Barbara," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that finally wiped the smile off her face. "I am not taking care of you or Madison. I will not pay this venue invoice or her credit card debt, and I am not moving either of you into any of my properties. My wealth belongs to me and my daughter alone. You do not get to torture me for 33 years and then demand the fruits of my labor just because your golden child bankrupted your social standing." Barbara let her hands fall to her sides, her jaw tightening as the loving mother facade began to crack. "Kelsey, be reasonable," she pleaded, her voice taking on that familiar sharp edge. "You cannot just abandon your family. We are in a desperate situation here. You have the resources to fix this instantly. If you just handle this crisis, we can all move forward. I will even apologize for what I said in the closet." "You really think this is just about today?" I asked, shaking my head slowly. "You think this is just about imported orchids and a bounce check? You have spent my entire life using me as a shield to absorb the impact of Madison's reckless behavior. But you made a fatal error. You assumed I was ignorant. You assumed that because I walked away and built my own life, I never looked back at the financial wreckage you left in my name." I turned slightly and signaled to Attorney Pierce, who had remained silently observing the exchange. He stepped forward, opening his heavy leather briefcase. He pulled out a single manila envelope and handed it directly to me. I held it up so my mother could see the bright red, urgent stamp across the front. When Lux Group started acquiring major commercial real estate, I needed to ensure my personal financial portfolio was absolutely flawless, I explained, holding her gaze. I had my legal team conduct a comprehensive forensic audit of my entire credit history dating back to the day I turned 18. I wanted to make sure there were no lingering discrepancies from my youth. Barbara's face went completely slack. The color drained from her cheeks faster than when Mr. Montgomery had announced the bounce check. She took a tiny involuntary step backward, her eyes locked on the manila envelope, as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. "Do you want to guess what my legal team found during that audit, Mother?" I asked, stepping forward and closing the physical distance she had just created. "They found a second mortgage. A very large, high-interest second mortgage taken out on the house you are currently living in. The loan was initiated exactly 6 years ago. It was the exact same year Madison decided she absolutely needed to spend a year studying fashion in Paris, and you suddenly had the cash to fund her extravagant lifestyle." Barbara opened her mouth, but she could not produce a single sound. Her chest heaved as she struggled to draw air into her lungs. "The bank records show that you needed a co-signer to secure that loan because your own credit was already overextended." I continued, my voice relentless and sharp. "And since Madison had no income, you decided to use me. But you did not ask me. You knew I would say no. So you forged my signature on the federal loan documents. You committed identity theft against your own daughter to finance a luxury vacation for your favorite child." "Please, Kelsey," she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. "Please keep your voice down. Someone will hear you." "I do not care who hears me," I stated firmly. I tossed the manila envelope onto the vanity table. It landed with a soft thud right next to Madison's discarded makeup brushes. "Here is the reality of your situation, Barbara. I am giving you exactly 30 days to pay off the entire remaining balance of that fraudulent mortgage. You will remove my name from that debt completely. If you fail to do so by the deadline, I am instructing Attorney Pierce to contact the authorities. I will press felony fraud charges against you." The words hung in the air with the weight of a judge rendering a final verdict. Barbara stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. The sheer terror of facing federal prison finally shattered the last remaining fragments of her arrogant delusion. Her knees buckled completely. She collapsed heavily into the velvet vanity chair behind her, knocking over a bottle of expensive perfume. It shattered on the marble floor, filling the room with an overpowering, suffocating floral scent. She began hyperventilating, her hands clutching her chest as her perfectly styled hair clung to her damp forehead. She was experiencing a full-blown panic attack, realizing that her lifelong strategy of using me as a disposable resource had just triggered her own absolute financial and legal ruin. She had nowhere to hide and no one left to manipulate. Madison, who was still kneeling on the floor, watched our mother collapse in horror. For her entire life, Barbara had been the ultimate safety net, the woman who would fix every mistake and fund every extravagant whim, regardless of the cost to others. Seeing the matriarch of the family completely neutralized and facing felony charges finally broke through Madison's thick layer of self-absorption. She realized she was entirely alone. There would be no secret bailouts today. There would be no more forged mortgages to cover her tracks. Before Madison could even attempt to formulate another pathetic excuse, Attorney Pierce stepped forward. He reached into his briefcase one final time. He did not pull out a thick folder this time. He produced a single crisp sheet of paper bearing the official letterhead of the Lux Group. He walked over to Madison, looking down at her ruined wedding dress and her tear-streaked face with absolute professional indifference. He extended his arm, holding the paper out toward her. Madison stared at it, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grasp the edge of the document. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming earlier. "That is an itemized invoice," Attorney Pierce explained, his voice echoing coldly in the destroyed suite. "It details the $25,000 in non-refundable labor costs incurred by the estate staff this morning. It covers the culinary preparation, the floral arrangements that had to be dismantled, and the hourly wages of the event coordinators who spent their morning trying to salvage a wedding funded by a forged check." Madison looked at the bottom line of the invoice, her eyes widening in fresh terror. "I cannot pay this," she gasped, dropping the paper onto the hardwood floor. "I have absolutely nothing left. You saw the bank statements. Trey took his money back. My credit cards are completely maxed out. I do not have $25,000. Attorney Pierce adjusted his cuffs, his expression completely devoid of pity. "That is incredibly unfortunate for you, Madison," he replied smoothly. "But since the funds provided by the groom were proven to be entirely fraudulent, the financial liability falls squarely on the individual who signed the vendor contracts. You signed those agreements. Therefore, you are personally liable for this invoice." He took a step back, aligning himself perfectly with me once again. "We expect full payment within 14 business days." Pierce continued, his tone sharp and uncompromising. "If the balance is not settled by that date, Lux Group will immediately file a lawsuit against you in civil court. We will garnish whatever minimum wages you manage to earn, and we will place liens on any future assets you acquire. We will ensure this debt follows you for the rest of your natural life." The devastation was absolute. The room, which had been a hub of arrogant luxury just 2 hours ago, now felt like a tomb. Mother and sister were completely trapped in a nightmare of their own making. Barbara was gasping for air in the vanity chair, facing the terrifying prospect of a criminal trial and the loss of her home. Madison was shivering on the floor, buried under a mountain of credit card debt, a civil lawsuit, and the public humiliation of a canceled high society wedding. They had tried to destroy my peace to elevate their own status. Instead, they had systematically dismantled their own lives. They were financially ruined, legally cornered, and socially exiled. I looked at the two women who shared my blood, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound sense of closure. The toxic cycle was finally broken forever. I did not need to raise my voice or throw a tantrum to achieve this ultimate victory. The truth, combined with unyielding personal boundaries, was the most destructive weapon I could wield. They had built a fragile house of cards, and I simply turned and walked away. I did not wait for my mother to formulate another plea, or for my sister to conjure another excuse. I simply turned my back on them. The heavy mahogany door of the bridal suite stood wide open, and I walked toward it, my posture perfectly straight. Behind me, the wailing continued, a desperate, pathetic symphony of two women realizing their reign of manipulation was permanently over. My heels clicked cleanly and rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. Each step felt incredibly light. I was physically walking out of the emotional prison they had kept me in for 33 years. Attorney Pierce followed closely behind me, his leather briefcase secured at his side. He pulled the massive suite door shut behind us with a heavy click, severing the chaotic noise of their financial ruin from the peaceful reality of my world. The corridor outside was a stark contrast to the destruction inside the room. Several venue employees were standing near the grand staircase, murmuring among themselves as they awaited further instructions regarding the canceled event. When they saw me approach, they immediately straightened their posture, recognizing the chief executive officer of their company. I offered them a polite, reassuring smile. Mr. Montgomery, the financial director, stepped forward from the group holding his clipboard. "The catering staff is standing by for your directive, Miss Kelsey," he said, his tone entirely professional. "Pack up the perishable food and donate it to the local women's shelter downtown," I instructed without breaking my stride. "Pay the staff their full wages for the day and then send everyone home early. The event is officially terminated." Mr. Montgomery nodded briskly, stepping aside to let me pass. It was incredibly empowering to reclaim my space and my authority navigating the sprawling mansion, not as a marginalized family outcast but as the absolute architect of my own domain. I bypassed the main lobby where confused guests were already being directed toward their vehicles by Richard. Instead, I took the side exit, pushing open the glass French doors that led to the private garden attached to the bridal suite wing. The crisp afternoon air instantly washed over me, carrying the sweet scent of blooming jasmine and freshly cut grass. The sun was shining brightly, completely indifferent to the dark storm that had just decimated my family inside. Sitting on a wrought iron bench beneath the shade of a massive willow tree was my 7-year-old daughter, Emma. She was swinging her legs happily, entirely insulated from the toxic explosion that had just occurred. Beside her sat my loyal executive assistant, Carmen. Carmen was a fierce, competent woman who had helped me build Lux Group from the ground up. She was holding a small pink bakery box, while Emma happily ate a chocolate pastry. When Emma saw me walking across the manicured lawn, her face lit up with absolute pure joy. "Mommy," she called out, dropping the last piece of her pastry back into the box and hopping off the bench. She ran across the grass, her custom blush pink dress billowing around her. I knelt down and caught her in my arms, hugging her tightly. She smelled like chocolate and sunshine. "Are we going to the wedding now, Mommy?" she asked, her bright eyes looking up at me with innocent curiosity. I smoothed a stray curl away from her forehead and smiled. "No, sweetheart," I told her softly. "There is no wedding today. The party got canceled. But we are going to go do something much better. We are going to take a drive to the beach and get whatever you want for dinner." Emma cheered excitedly, unfazed by the change of plans. To her, a day at the beach was infinitely better than standing quietly in a stuffy reception hall. I stood up and looked at Carmen, offering a nod of profound gratitude. "Thank you for keeping her entertained, Carmen," I said. "You know I always have your back, Kelsey," Carmen replied, offering a warm, knowing smile. My black armored SUV was already idling at the edge of the garden driveway, the driver standing patiently by the open rear door. I took Emma's tiny hand in mine. We walked together across the stone pathway, leaving the massive French chateau-style mansion behind us. I did not cast a single glance over my shoulder. I did not wonder what my mother was doing or how my sister was going to survive her catastrophic debt. Their problems were no longer my burden to carry. We climbed into the luxurious, quiet interior of the vehicle, and the driver shut the door, closing us off from the world. As the SUV glided smoothly down the long gravel driveway, moving further and further away from the estate, I looked at my daughter. She was already leaning her head against the leather seat, her eyes heavy with the sweet exhaustion of a perfect afternoon. The chaos of the estate, the screaming, the broken glass, the sheer toxic panic of my mother and sister, it all faded into the background like a bad movie playing on a muted television. We were finally free. 6 months have passed since that sunny afternoon. Half a year since the grand illusion my family built finally shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely of their own making. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy them. I simply removed my financial protection and let reality do the rest. Madison learned a very harsh lesson about how the real world operates without my silent safety net or Trey bank account. Lux Group followed through on our civil suit regarding the venue labor costs. Combined with the massive credit card debt she had secretly accumulated for her fake luxury lifestyle, she was forced into complete financial ruin. The courts did not absolve her of the restitution she owed my company due to the deliberate fraudulent nature of her actions. Today, the woman who sneered at my career, who demanded imported orchids and called my daughter baggage, is working a minimum wage retail job at a mid-tier suburban department store. She spends her long days folding discounted sweaters, standing on her feet for 8 hours a shift, and taking sharp orders from teenage assistant managers. Her meager wages are aggressively garnished every single week to slowly chip away at the mountain of debt she owes. The wealthy bridesmaids she bought with stolen money vanished the moment her platinum credit cards were declined. She lives in a tiny, cramped studio apartment entirely cut off from the high society she sacrificed her soul to join. There are no more Maldives vacations or designer handbags. There is only the exhausting reality of the life she actually earned. My mother Barbara did not fare any better. When the 30-day deadline on the fraudulent mortgage approached, she realized I was absolutely serious about pressing federal charges. Attorney Pierce made it crystal clear to her legal counsel that identity theft and wire fraud carried mandatory prison sentences. To avoid spending her twilight years in a federal penitentiary, Barbara was forced to liquidate her only remaining asset. She had to sell the sprawling suburban house she had prized above all else. Because she had to sell it quickly in a distressed state to meet the deadline, she took a massive financial loss. After paying off the forged loan, the accumulated high interest, and the real estate fees, she was left with practically nothing. She now rents a small, outdated one-bedroom apartment in a distinctly working-class neighborhood, far away from the elite zip codes she used to brag about. The local country club permanently revoked her membership due to unpaid dues and the massive public scandal of the canceled wedding. Her social circle abandoned her completely, treating her like a pariah. She has tried to call me dozens of times, from various unlisted numbers, crying and begging for a second chance or a small loan. I block every single one. She made her bed and now she has to sleep in it alone. Trey handled the destruction of his wedding with the exact kind of quiet, dignified grace I expected from a man of his caliber. He did not seek public revenge or drag the situation out in the press. He simply severed all ties with Madison and moved forward with his life. About 3 weeks after the canceled ceremony, a package arrived at my corporate headquarters. It was not addressed to me, but to Emma. Inside was a beautiful handcrafted wooden dollhouse. It was age-appropriate, thoughtful, and entirely devoid of any pretentious luxury branding. Tucked inside the roof was a handwritten letter addressed to me on premium stationery. Trey wrote a message of profound, genuine gratitude. He thanked me once again for having the courage to expose the truth and for saving him from a disastrous marriage. He mentioned that he had accepted a senior partnership promotion within his venture capital firm and was permanently relocating to their London office to start a brand new chapter abroad. He wished Emma and me a lifetime of happiness and peace. It was the perfect closure from a genuinely good man who simply got caught in my family toxic web. As for me, I am exactly where I was always meant to be. Lux Group has continued to expand, acquiring 3 more premier hospitality properties across the coastline. My business thrives because it is built on a foundation of integrity, hard work, and absolute transparency. But more importantly, my home thrives. Emma is flourishing in her second-grade class, entirely unaware of the bullet we dodged. We spend our weekends baking cookies, visiting science museums, and walking along the beach near our home. There is no more walking on eggshells. There is no more shrinking myself to make insecure people feel taller. The heavy, suffocating burden of trying to earn the love of a mother and sister who only saw me as an exploitable resource has been permanently lifted from my shoulders. Sometimes you have to let the bridge burn completely to realize you never needed to cross it in the first place. I built my own empire while they were busy playing pretend in a fragile house of cards. They chose their path of deception, and I chose my path of truth. And as I sit here looking out at the ocean from the balcony of my estate, watching my daughter play in the sun, I can honestly say I have never been happier. The past is finally behind us, and the future is beautifully entirely ours. I sit here now, at my polished mahogany desk, in the corner office of the Lux Group headquarters. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a panoramic view of the city skyline, a sprawling testament to what can be built when you stop letting other people tear you down. The thick glass is entirely soundproof, keeping the chaotic noise of the traffic far below at bay. It is a physical barrier that perfectly mirrors the emotional boundaries I finally learned to construct. I look down at the bustling streets, watching the tiny cars move in endless lines, and I feel an overwhelming sense of profound gratitude. For 33 years, I believed the absolute lie that society forcefully shoves down our throats from the moment we are born. Family is everything. Blood is thicker than water. You have to forgive them because they are your parents or your siblings. I let those empty platitudes keep me chained to a mother who viewed me strictly as a disposable shield, and a sister who viewed me as a convenient stepping stone. I absorbed their cruelty, their endless financial manipulation, and their sharp, passive-aggressive insults because I genuinely thought it was my duty. I operated under the tragic delusion that if I just worked a little harder, accommodated them a little more, or sacrificed enough of my own happiness, they would eventually love me the way they loved each other. But the harsh, undeniable reality is that blood does not equal loyalty. Sharing a matching genetic code with someone does not give them an automatic, lifelong VIP pass to disrespect you. It does not grant them a divine license to exploit your hard-earned resources or belittle your innocent children. As a society, we are taught to be fiercely protective of our peace when it comes to strangers, bad dates, or toxic friendships, but we are conditioned to tolerate absolute emotional terrorism if it comes from someone who shares our last name. That is the most dangerous psychological scam in the world. Walking away from my mother and my sister was not a sudden act of malice or bitter revenge. It was the ultimate necessary act of self-preservation. The moment I finally stopped carrying the crushing, suffocating weight of their impossible expectations, my entire life expanded rapidly. The immense mental energy I used to waste trying to anticipate Barbara's volatile mood swings or mitigate Madison's catastrophic selfish mistakes is now poured entirely into my business and my daughter. My company revenue has doubled in the last 6 months alone, but more importantly, my personal peace of mind has multiplied 1,000 times over. There is a profound, beautiful quiet that settles over your life when you permanently stop engaging with toxic people. At first, that quiet feels terrifying. You expect the other shoe to drop. You wait anxiously for the frantic phone calls, the expertly crafted guilt trips, the manufactured dramatic emergencies. But when you stand firm, when you refuse to pick up the phone, open the door, or write the check, that initial anxiety slowly transforms into profound, unshakable peace. I do not flinch when my phone rings anymore. I do not spend my holidays walking on eggshells, trying to maintain a fragile artificial peace that was never real to begin with. Emma notices the difference too. Children are incredibly perceptive barometers of our internal emotional states. She no longer sees a mother who is exhausted, defensive, and constantly on edge. She sees a woman who is grounded, confident, and entirely present in every single moment. We laugh louder now. We sleep better. Our home is a true sanctuary, not a tactical battlefield. I successfully broke the generational curse of manipulation and emotional abuse so that Emma will never have to know what it feels like to constantly earn her place in her own family. She will grow up knowing that love is supposed to be safe, unconditional, and respectful. She will know that firm boundaries are not cruel punishments, but basic non-negotiable requirements for healthy relationships. If you are listening to this right now and you are bone tired from trying to appease people who are actively committed to misunderstanding you, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to aggressively protect your peace, your finances, and your children from anyone who threatens them regardless of their official title in your family tree. You do not owe your abusers your presence simply because you share a biological history. Grieving the supportive family you truly deserved is a deeply painful process, but it is infinitely better than sacrificing your sanity to serve the toxic family you actually got. Do not ever let anyone guilt trip you into tolerating abuse under the guise of family loyalty. Build your empire, protect your peace, and never apologize for outgrowing the people who desperately tried to keep you small. The view from the top is incredibly beautiful once you finally drop the heavy baggage holding you down. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below.